Bryant Thomas with us again here today, longtime AP newsman out of the Washington Bureau in Washington, D.C. Bryant, your reaction to what happened in Iowa with that mess involving the caucus and how that relates now to the state where you're sitting in, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is supposed to be the big actual first primary, and it was expected that Sanders would have momentum out of Iowa. But yet, because of the muddled results, even though now it seems to be evening out, he may yet come out on top. In the meantime, his thunder was stolen from him by the muddled results. So, where does that leave Sanders now going into the New Hampshire primary?
Well, Sanders is still the favorite here, only because he's the next door guy, and I think that he and Buttigieg are going to probably duel to a real close finish here, just as they did in Iowa. The Iowa thing was unfortunate, but not compromised in terms of the results, only the method by which they got there. It was slow, it was painstaking, it was an electronic glitch that prevented fast tabulation of the caucus results. And the end result is still genuine. It's not compromised. It certainly annoyed people by being late, but the end result was not fractured.
So you're saying, despite the glitches, despite the corrections they keep making, you think that the final results will be valid and accurate?
Sure. They made sure of that when they started. And that's why it took them so long to recount and recanvass the caucuses that did take place. The last thing they wanted to do was have anybody say at the end of the process, well, look, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you left this guy out, you left that group out. That's what the Democratic state chairman was very eager to point out, that there was no compromise or infection of anybody, any outside force changing the results.
So you don't see this as any kind of a move by certain forces to suppress the vote for Sanders. You don't smell a rat here.
No, not at all. No, I think most of the people who went to these caucuses, and keep in mind, they had over 3 million people in Iowa, and fewer than 200,000 went to these caucuses. So this is hardly what you call, a groundswell, like for a large turnout. This was not the case. But caucuses are like that. They're not supposed to be elections.
All right, but the problem is now, since the results initially indicated that Buttigieg was on top, that really slowed the bandwagon effect that Sanders would have otherwise attained from this. So is he in a weaker position now than he would have been if the results hadn't been messed up in Iowa?
I don't know. I can tell you this, that there are a number of evidences of Buttigieg's prominence in terms of lawn signs and street signs and town hall meetings that he's having here in New Hampshire that probably would not be nearly as attractive to voters had he not been the candidate of choice in Iowa, or at least close to it. So let's see what his momentum is what I'm saying.
Until now, it seemed that Sanders would have his hands down in New Hampshire. Now, the equation seems to have changed here now, perhaps significantly, or not so much.
Well, I don't know. I think that there are certain people here in New Hampshire who are looking at Pete twice, who probably never would have had he not done so well in Iowa. All it takes is a couple of victories to cement a front-runner status. And if he wins or comes in very close to winning here in New Hampshire, then Buttigieg has got a good chance to continue into Nevada and South Carolina.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was going to mention that years ago, before the Iowa Caucus was established or became prominent, the New Hampshire primary was it for your first showing, and that would provide significant bandwagon effect. Now with
Correct.
the Iowa Caucus, is it does New Hampshire play such an important part, nearly as important part as it did years ago?
Well, it's the first hard vote. That's the difference. Uh, and there are going to be many more people than caucused in Iowa who voted here in New Hampshire. That's the big difference. So I think New Hampshire is still the first bellwether state in this whole process for both parties.
You know, it's interesting that both Sanders and Buttigieg are not really what was referred to traditionally as a mainstream candidate. They both attract certain specific segments of the population. Now, so there's pros and cons here for both candidates as they move beyond New Hampshire and into different states with vastly different populations and cultures. So Sanders may seem too radical for some of the conservative states. Buttigieg may seem too moderate for some of the more rebellious states. So, in that equation, who do you see coming out on top as this moves beyond New Hampshire towards Super Tuesday?
It all depends on New Hampshire's results. If Buttigieg shows up well here again or manages to eke out a win, then that's a whole different ballgame. It's if Sanders wins here by a strong margin, which is not what we're seeing, then that's good for him. But it all depends on who does what here.
But no, what I'm saying is if Buttigieg wins strongly in New Hampshire, is strong showing in New Hampshire, does that really cement his position in these other states that may not be so accepting of a candidate of his ilk?
Well, I think, look, everybody knows that the whisper campaign about his lifestyle is going to be part of this game. It's already, being, mentioned by Mike Pence and people like that. They've already honed in on this. And although they're reluctant to say it publicly, the whisper campaign can be just as damaging. So whether that's going to be successful remains to be seen.
Yeah, by saying of his ilk, I didn't really mean his homosexuality. What I meant was his basic political philosophies and his approach to the problems of the nation, which may not sell that well in certain other states. So again, what I'm saying is, would a strong showing or a win by Buttigieg in New Hampshire necessarily give him a bandwagon effect from New Hampshire on?
Well, if it worked here, if on Tuesday Buttigieg comes in number one and surprises everybody, then the answer to that is obviously yes, because he will have had traction that he otherwise never would have entertained.
So then you see him as making the sales in other primary states after that.
Oh, sure.
Much
Why
more,
not?
much more easily.
Sure, absolutely.
So, there's predictions now, especially after Iowa, and how close the top tier is, especially Sanders and Buttigieg, that we're heading for a brokered convention. And if it's a brokered convention, that gives the party or whatever forces may be working behind the scenes an opportunity to present a savior candidate at the last minute, which could be Bloomberg, or even as some people are saying Hillary may be injected. So do you see it heading towards a brokered convention? And if so, who would be the surprise candidate or the acceptable candidate?
Well, I think it cannot be Hillary. That's beyond the realm of possibility. She has negatives that are still in the 40s. The candidate who tries to take on Donald Trump in November cannot do that again. We know what that result was. The last thing that they want to do is have a brokered convention and essentially tell all the people who voted in these primaries, you don't matter. And that's what they'd be doing. So the last thing Democrats want to do is go back to the smoke-filled back room to choose a candidate. That's not smart.
Well, what do you think the chances are that it is going to end up as a brokered convention?
I think we'll have to wait and see what happens on Super Tuesday to see who emerges as the most likely choice for the Democratic nomination. I don't think we can make any decisions until then. If the race is tight beyond Super Tuesday, if we're still looking at no clear emerging candidate, then the heightened process of a brokered convention perhaps would get, larger, but not yet.
What about the super delegates? Apparently, there are efforts afoot now to reestablish the super delegates that were
Well,
supposed to
they were never not established. They just don't have first dibs on this
right,
unless there's a snag at the end.
right.
So I don't think the Democrats necessarily did themselves a favor by keeping the superdelegates in place. It was just an effort to mollify those within the party who felt that they had to have a say in the end-all result of who the candidate is. And that's a problem with Democratic voters across the country, because primaries are supposed to choose the candidate, not the backroom politicians who are pulling the strings in the top end of the party.
But aren't there efforts now, or at least suggestions, to revert back to the superdelegates having the first shot?
Well, I don't, there might be, but I can't see how they would do that. That is really a dumb move. There was so much dissension and discord after the Sanders Clinton thing. And you got to keep in mind one thing, that Sanders paid lip service to Hillary's getting the nomination. And as a matter of fact, they had the big love fest here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right after he dropped out, and he endorsed her and said he would campaign for her. And he made a couple of obligatory appearances, and then he disappeared. And with him went all of his supporters. And they were not bashful about saying that they didn't go to the polls in November simply because their man was out and she was in. And the end result was 4 years of Donald Trump. Now, whether the Democrats have put this together, and they have said, for instance, at the Iowa Caucuses the other night, that no matter who the Democratic nominee is, we're going to vote for him. I want to see that in actuality. It's one thing to have your candidate not win in one state and then have him then go on to win in other states. It's another thing if that candidate loses all the way across the board. And people get cynical, they get mad, they get frustrated when candidates that they support and work for do not win. That's only natural. Look at the problem that Trump had in the 2016 process. This is not a game that does not take hostages. It does.
All right, one last question. Who do you think can beat Trump?
Well, I think if you look at the head-to-head polling, there are a number of Democrats who can beat him. The offstage player here is Bloomberg. And Bloomberg has been spending a lot of money in Super Tuesday states, having given up on the first four because he came in so late. So if you look at Super Tuesday and you look at Bloomberg as the candidate who has the ability, A, to fund himself throughout the rest of the campaign, and B, stand up on the stage and take on Donald Trump for the media monster that he is, which clearly many of the other Democrats do not enjoy, then Bloomberg could be the dark horse candidate. I shudder to think about some of the other Democrats on the debate stage with Trump. I mean, he can chew anybody up and spit them out. I mean, he's really good at it. And,
so other than Bloomberg, then you think the chances of others beating Trump are weak?
Well, weaker, I think. But it all depends on how these primaries shake out. If there's one clear victor in all of these primaries, if we have, for instance, if Buttigieg wins all 4 of these upcoming states before Super Tuesday, then that changes everything.
All right, Bryant Thomas, longtime newsman, reporter and commentator, news anchor, most recently of the AP Bureau in Washington, D.C. Thanks for your insights.
You bet.